All right, the minutes.
Speed dating the rest of them.
Does anybody,
I have a comment on the minutes. I
Yes.
spoke with,
Sorry.
who took the minutes? Counselor Cook, thank you. Counselor Cook, and she will have the minutes of the next meeting for our review.
so we just have two off the, all right, we don't have to go down in order. Is there one that anybody wants to go to?
I'll keep my remarks on the Inflation Reduction Act very brief
Okay, go for it.
and set the stage for a longer conversation next week or next month.
All right,
So it got done, and this is the biggest action that the President and Congress, our federal government has taken ever. And a week before it got done, it wasn't gonna get done. It was not possible. It's incredible that it happened. The three qualified study firms say that this will enable a 40% reduction in emissions by 2030. That said, to meet the basic Paris target, we need to get to 50%. So there's a delta remaining. I mean, it's the good news and the bad news, right? The number of programs is so big that it crosses my eyes. I couldn't be with the full list. And we'll talk about that. I understand that there's something for coastal communities, but I'll talk about that next month. And this group can be, I foresee that this group, and I don't know, predicting the future is always difficult, but could be really helpful in helping to shape and advise our legislators who are gonna have our share, New Hampshire's share of that 385 billion, or 3.85 billion, excuse me. It's 3.85 billion, it's not 385 billion, misspoke. Just a small decimal point.
Just what's the decimal point here?
You only wish that could have happened somewhere higher up, and maybe it would have been a lot bigger.
Wait, isn't it 385 billion? I'm pretty sure it's not 3.85.
Yes.
385. Yeah, it's the big one. So no decimal point.
I'm getting kind of loopy.
Anyway, the point is, we
Yeah.
got a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
We gotta figure out how
More
to.
than we know what to do with.
Right.
All right, okay, anything else you wanted to say, or is that it?
I want to vote for talking about the whole Tom Morgan thing and policy on solar versus action on solar.
All right.
Earlier rather than later.
Okay.
That's all.
All right, I would suggest, according to what was just put out, perhaps we go to the cap, because really, that is what I think is going to inform all of us on how to utilize this. And if people are okay, we could go there. All right, so, and then we can get to, that one is more, going to be maybe a little bit more contentious or not.
Let's see.
If we go to the cap, who wants to speak to that and where
I
we're
can
at?
start. I
Okay.
don't have a ton to say because we're waiting for the proposals to come in, and the deadline is September 1st. So the closing of questions date is today, so the purchasing officer or agent, whatever they call her, will put out a list. If there's any questions that came in, put them out on the website, but then we'll get the final proposals in. The one thing about the climate action plan that you guys may already know is that there was $100,000 allocated from the city council. We made the decision to put $80,000 in the RFP to say you can give us a bid for $80,000, and then the $20,000, the thought was we'd reserve that so we could sort of hit the ground running with some of the actions that are in there and not have to wait for authorization on funds and that kind of thing. If you looked at the RFP, it's really strong on public outreach and engagement, and, you know, like we've been saying all along, we don't want a plan that we just set aside. We want a plan that envisions action and suggests specific actions. So there's a lot that we're gonna be looking for from the consultant. And, you know, as we looked at, when we looked at all the other RFPs and all the other climate action plans, there's gonna be a lot of similar things that happen, but this is gonna be tailored to Portsmouth. They're gonna have some knowledge, hopefully, the contractor, and know how to run with the ball on all the work that's going on. And we'll talk later, I think, about all the different groups, but I think there's, you know, reason to hope for a good firm, I think, you know, we'll see. That's the key, is that we get a good firm. And
That's great.
How has interest been?
there hasn't been a lot of phone calls to me, and Bridie, who's the purchasing agent,
Have you put it up on
Hasn't said much. It's on the
Carbon
city's,
Leadership Forum, CLF?
no, but probably late now.
Week to go.
Be surprised how many proposals happened the night before.
No, I know.
I can send you the link or.
Great,
you could-
yep. Yep. We sent it out to all the people that, you know, the lists that we put together of different firms, the ones we liked in the proposals. And hopefully we get a good batch. If not, we'll probably put it out again for another period of time, but, and see if we can spread a wider net, but I'm assuming we'll get a pretty good response.
For what it's worth, when I did speak to Jeff, the reporter from the Herald yesterday, I put a bunch of plugs in about the climate action plan and how that will essentially bridge the gap. So it's not just, hey, the pool's gonna be an issue, the Shaw's gonna be an issue, so on and so forth. Like, hey, here's an actual plan. And I talked about how September 1st was the deadline to get proposals in. None of it got mentioned. You know, that's fine, but it was going back to the whole leverage thing. I figured, hey, if we could get that out there and just put that seed in people's minds that, like, yes, something bad could very well happen, but we are working on a plan for the next 50 years.
Any other comments or questions?
I have a question, and maybe this might be a little silly, but, so the RFP is, who are we requesting a proposal from?
Anybody?
Anybody. So anybody can just write up like a proposal for who they think should write it?
No, they're the people who would write it.
So
if
they
you
would
wanted to-
send us a draft of the climate action
Don't
plan?
say that, Peter. She'll
They
make
show
one
their-
up. She'll,
Okay, that's all right.
she will.
Yeah, that's all right.
They show their capability as often a firm or a company who specializes in these types of things. So they come forward and they say, this is our experience, here are past projects we've done, here's our team. Here, often it is also here's what we were thinking for yours.
Yeah.
And
Gotcha.
then
So I was talking to Effie
So
just
our
briefly
list
about
shows
bidders, like how,
Yeah.
when does that come into play, the bidding part? Once we have like
proposals
firms?
come in with a
Yeah.
There's the bid, I guess, you know, sometimes, some proposals, they separate the proposal and the cost.
Okay.
And so you submit your proposal and you submit your bid, what the amount's gonna be. And we open the proposal, we read through them, we pick a firm that we like the best on their qualifications, and then we rank those, and then we open the dollar amounts and see if they match up, and then it's like a, you know. But this one, we just said the amount because it's not a super high amount, but it's not super low either, so it's kind of a medium amount, and we thought they would see that the budget authorizations were 100,000 and they'd all bid at 100,000, so rather than
Yeah.
let them start there, we thought we'd start at 80 and then reserve a little. If the,
Yeah.
if the firm's
Okay.
really good and they're the ones that spend the extra 20, we can just amend the contract, but maybe we put a proposal in for a outreach firm or a different firm to do
Gotcha.
some other work
Okay.
down the road.
That makes sense.
One
Thank
way to
you.
look at it is it's a college application for
Okay.
anyone who wants to apply to write the climate action plan.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. My terms.
The firms that Peter mentioned earlier, when we looked at climate action plans, particularly from the Northeast, but all over the
Yeah.
country, the companies that responded and wrote those plans, we kept a list of their
Oh. That's
names.
smart.
And a lot of them had, part of their proposal was very technical, and by like an engineering firm.
Oh,
That
gotcha.
was all about greenhouse gas emissions. But then they'd be working with a more, a firm that specialized in community engagement.
Gotcha.
And
Oh,
putting
that's
on
smart. Okay.
public meetings and things like that.
That's super.
Yeah, so it might be
And
a
is-
team, it might be several firms that.
Okay.
Right, might be a
Bid it.
team.
That's really
Yeah.
smooth.
And as I understand it, before you did this, they looked at a number of climate action plans
Yeah.
that already existed, so that they had firms
I remember
around
the
it.
slideshow on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. That was my question. Great.
One thing that I noticed when I was reading the plan, it started out with, how do we build resilience? That goes to the swimming pool. Resilience is, everybody's worried about where that is. But when I read further in, I thought it was really a nice job of spelling about how we do reduction or remediation of the greenhouse gases. Because this is short-term in some ways, this is long-term. This is probably gonna be the bigger, well, they're both gonna be big, but I thought, before I even started looking at climate plans, I didn't even realize we had two areas, so as I think about planning, it's wrapping our mind around the big picture and knowing then how and where we can apply it. So it's good for anybody who didn't see it. I think you can get it on the link and go through it.
I'm gonna propose we go to community engagement yet, just because we're just talking about community engagement being a large portion of the climate action.
Good, go
plan.
for it.
I'm actually not part of the community engagement subcommittee. I just thought it would make
Very
sense.
nice.
I'm gonna look over
Can I
at
give
the.
the update?
So Effie and I have met and just started talking about how we go forward with community engagement and trying to find other people who might be interested. We have a couple of people who might be interested, Christina Dubin and James Christie. James has already started a local newsletter about sustainable issues around here, and if any of you don't know Christina Dubin, she's volunteered for Surfrider. She's been doing a ton of stuff, and she just got her master's in public policy, so she would be a huge asset for us.
Have
Yes,
the name of that newsletter? I could,
I will send you the link.
fantastic.
They are both transitioning with jobs and getting kids back in school, so they are kind of waiting to see what this subcommittee's commitment looks like, but they said they would at least be interested in being consultants and involved in some capacity. I looked, I believe Effie did as well, thoroughly through the city's community engagement report that they put together. Stephanie Secord and somebody from the library, I forget all the authors. And it seemed like a lot of the things that they talked about, and specifically a lot of their recommendations, are things that we've also talked about in how we move forward with the climate action plan. So things like testing communication campaigns through surveys and public information meetings and different things like that. And in trying different technology like community engagement platforms. They specifically mention one called Consider It for the climate action plan that a citizen recommended. So I've been looking into that one a little bit to learn more about that. And then assembling a community engagement team. So I reached out to Stephanie and she said she'd be willing to help us, but one of the questions or underlying things that comes up is, are we a subcommittee of this committee, or are we more anchored in the citizen action group, Portsmouth Climate Solutions, that have a lot of fingers already out there in the community doing things? So that's been one of the discussions, is what personally, there's a lot of overlap between both groups, so we're kind of a bit attached at the hip anyway, but if we're a subcommittee from here, we might have more access to Stephanie, but that might not be necessary because we might have more connections in the community on the other side. So that's one of the things that I kind of bring up to this group, and if anybody has thoughts or ideas about that. And yeah,
I had one
chime in.
thought that, when we had our Green Buildings Subcommittee meeting, it seems like we have so many things going as offshoots of this committee that maybe it makes sense to be a work group of Portsmouth Climate Solutions, knowing that a couple of us on Portsmouth Climate Solutions come to this meeting. The other thing is Portsmouth Climate Solutions meets weekly, so we can have a lot happening between these monthly sustainability committee meetings.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we have a item on the agenda that hits on this exact point, but we might as well talk about it now. And it's the intercommittee communication. And so, what we talked about with the Green Building Committee and all the different subcommittees, if they're gonna have a voice in the city, it makes sense that, that committee be a subcommittee of the Sustainability Committee, because then it can report back to the Sustainability Committee, and the Sustainability Committee can report to the City Council, who sets policy. So if you wanna have influence on policy in the city, it seems like a subcommittee of the Sustainability Committee is a good way to go. And that makes sense, it seems, for the green buildings and for the engagement. Could go either way, I see what you're saying. And if the Portsmouth Climate Solutions has enough energy and inertia to carry out its own, then what would be really neat is if the Sustainability Committee then partners with the Portsmouth Climate Solutions to do community engagement through the Climate Action Plan. Then we have not just the city, but we have a committee in this, outside of the, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if Portsmouth Climate Solutions is a committee or a group or
I call
whatever
it
they're called
Citizen Action
themselves.
Group.
Citizen Action
Ask
Group,
Bert
yeah.
what he would call it.
And
But
if I could
Yeah.
add to that, I completely agree with Peter. So my thought would be start as a subcommittee here that liaisons with the Citizens Action Group. Did I get that correct? And then when the Climate Action Plan starts being implemented, if the Citizens Action Group actually becomes an entity, like if they become incorporated and everything else, they'd be more likely to actually partner with whoever gets the cap itself. Because so whoever writes the best application and is selected, they'll likely be looking for someone to partner with, and they're more likely to pick an actual incorporated organization over a just group of volunteers. So my thought is, in the meantime, just stay as a subcommittee of this that liaisons with them, and then if the bidder who gets the cap is actually looking for someone to partner with, if they become incorporated, they could partner with them and you guys can transition over there. Or if they don't become incorporated, you guys could stay and they could just work through you as part of the city. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I might need like
Well, not-
a diagram.
So,
No.
I really like what
Yeah.
Peter said about like, what is the point of subcommittees? And it's to eventually get to a policy level.
Exactly.
And the engagement is a really important part of all of these conversations, like part of the cap and part of making sure that citizens are involved in all of the process and feel like they can be. But that is not a policy objective. That is a part of other policy objectives. So I guess I kind of like the idea. I mean, there is so much overlap. We're going to have these voices. We know the value in the RFP. Makes it very clear that community engagement is important. And this is a big part of the sustainability community in Portsmouth. So I think naturally I would argue that to do the job properly, you need to have talked to those groups.
Agree.
So I just really like the point that Peter made about like, I think, because it's tempting to branch off a lot, but we have people who are doing a lot of these things already, and there's also the time commitment thing, which is hard.
Yeah, and whatever
Can I ask a
can be
question?
most, inclusive, really, because we want to have a successful public, everybody has the same goal, that we're going to move the needle on climate action. And so if it makes sense to form into a committee that's part of another committee that's outside of the Sustainability Committee, that's fine. But if it probably can do both as public engagement, I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, the Portsmouth Climate Solutions, the one that meets weekly, isn't incorporated or anything. It's a group that's just been meeting for how many years, Bert?
We're at our 46th consecutive week, coming out of the Caring for the Future. And we are a subcommittee of C-RAY, which is a 501c3. So there is a status where people,
Okay.
Yeah.
so we're already a complex system. One of the reasons I'm looking at this, I'm looking at how in this extraordinary time do we do the connections that are going to get the most leverage. That's because it's not a matter of people's goodwill. We got a lot of people working hard, and how do we not get so complex that we can't communicate? And so I really like, we're cutting new ground here. This Sustainability Committee, and I think, Wes, you pointed out correctly, we're in a position for a few years, not a lot of years, where we have an opportunity to do something. And we need to go and form the structures that are gonna enable us to do it. So the climate action plan is one. And I'm clear that we have some entities. We have our committee here. We have committees that have, originally the CAP committee was part of this, and then now it has done kind of its task. And now we have Green Building, which is more ongoing, and with Aubrey on it, I mean, you guys are an incredible resource that can influence policy, and are. So I see you as part of this committee. Community engagement, I think, if I was understanding you correctly, is a little bit of a different animal, because community engagement is how do we really get from the 2% of the government to the 98% of the community, and that's gonna be ongoing. So, Peter, I don't have an answer, but maybe, could it be
I have-
both, really?
I have another committee, Transportation and Climate Action. Phil Lyons just joined the meeting here.
Oh, that's great.
But I just want to mention that, there's
Well-
another committee, so
Well, here, I have a printout that I'm
I
gonna.
don't think it's going to get easier, Bert, I think it's just going to get harder.
All right, so, what,
Well, an ecosystem multiplies and
Yeah.
furthering and distinguishing, so I don't know, I would caution people about laying value on it, and kind of be with the what's so of it, as distinct from it's good or it's bad. It just is what it is. I have a question, by the way. Are you done, Peter? I'm sorry, I felt like I was interrupting
I
you.
do add one quick thing.
I was just
So-
Well,
announcing.
before you get to that,
Yeah.
I want to grab the floor.
I'll need to circle back just for the notes to make sure I got all this, because we went through a couple of agenda items, and there were some really important points, so I want to make sure I get them.
let's let Peter finish, and then we'll go to you.
Good.
No, I'm good. I don't know that, I don't disagree. I just think on some level, we want to see how we can work best together, you know? I mean, that's really the bottom line, and I agree that public engagement is different. That's the different, committee doesn't have the specific goal of, you know, transportation or green buildings or, I mean, I guess the climate solutions is broad, but it's,
So Jess, did you want to say something?
I did, but I don't want to, well, I just don't want to close a door. You know, like Stephanie could be I agree with Wes, like I don't need to get caught up in who we are connected with, because I think we are all connected, but I just want to make sure that if we're trying to reach all the community, that we don't close any doors to that ability. So that was my reason for wanting to bring this discussion up.
I wasn't lobbying,
Could we put
actually,
it, could we put that in the notes, and I'm just, that the, it's part, a subcommittee of the Blue Ribbon Committee, and it's also a subcommittee of C-Rate, so it's both. I don't think that there's any, is there a conflict in that? Then we have access to both, I don't know.
I'll restate what I said earlier differently. Whoever ends up doing the climate action plan, for the outreach component, they may only want to deal with a legal entity for that aspect. And a subcommittee here is a legal entity of the city. The other organization or any other organization, unless if they're a legal entity, they might not want to do community outreach through them. That's the only reason I was saying it. But if they fall under C-Ray, they'd be more likely, if it's clear, like, hey, we are part of this 501c3, they might be more likely to be utilized by whoever gets the climate action plan for outreach.
Yeah, so I think they're both are possible. And I think we don't need to make any decisions now, so we can utilize both. Is that clear enough, Effie?
Yes.
And I was gonna ask who was taking notes, since Kate isn't here.
Yeah,
And I
Peter
saw
checked.
that, Steve. All right, and Wes, then I think everybody's, you wanted to say something in regard?
I'm complete.
Oh, you're complete?
I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to just slip it in here, since we're on committees. Bill Lyons asked if I would just highlight a few things for the committee. One, they have 9 people who showed up for the committee. And that means that Peter and.
The transportation, yeah,
And they have a meeting coming up this Monday.
climate action.
The kickoff is Monday, 8/29. And I think Peter and Kate met with Bill, so what I love is we're all connecting. So I know that Bill felt very supported and congruent with where everybody was. And what he's looking at in the next meeting is to get kind of a focus, get to know who each other is, and focus on strategies to reduce transportation sector emissions. So they're going to have some expertise that they can recommend, and we got pretty top quality people in that. The group will also hopefully do some research that they can bring on greenhouse gases and which ones are the leverage points. And they will want to do early input. So the committee doesn't maybe see itself as going on for a long time, but to get it right to you in the start, so it'd be useful to the committee. And Bill, if you're watching, I hope I did you okay.
Well, the only thing that other thing that we talked about reducing emissions, and it's for the community. There might be some overlap on municipal, but really it's focused on the community, emissions rather than the municipal emissions, which we're hoping to be, a leader on our own on emissions. But in terms of the group itself, that's, it's a big task just to tackle the communities.
And just to have the expertise to know, how do you draw the boundaries? Because you set goals, and then if you set goals and people say you did 1%, oh, because you didn't include 95 or the airport. So I love that people are sophisticated enough to set goals that can show progress, but also take in the big picture. That's why I think it's good to have an expertise.
Just for clarification, Bert, did you say the kickoff meeting is 8/29?
This Monday at 6:30.
Okay, so they haven't had a meeting yet?
No.
Okay.
No, this way
Those
we're-
people signed up, that many
Okay.
people signed up.
All 9 people will get it, and I don't know if
Yeah.
all 9 will be able to show
Right.
up.
Okay, thanks. Great.
Yes, did you want to say something on this?
Yeah, and I think Peter was laughing because the greenhouse gas emissions that we're doing, it would be really great if at that meeting, Bill, if you're listening, we could get some of these, people who are very talented in the transportation sector to come and also help with some of the greenhouse gas emissions because, it's one, shared information and also making sure that those boundaries and everything, that each entity is thinking about it in a similar way. So those go really hand in hand because it is
And
not
as I-
easy to count these things.
And when I see about building buildings, they are integrated to transportation. Do you have, and then those are some of the suggestions that this committee can make. And building codes and transportation, and there's a whole fun and exciting area that everybody's going to be seeing coming up.
So, Tori, can I ask, is there another subcommittee that's the greenhouse gas measuring?
Sort of,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
that was an offshoot of the CAP
Yeah.
because it's
Right.
hand in hand, so
Okay.
that's,
Boy.
right now.
I am very peripherally involved. It's
Jess,
more
John,
Kate
and I
and Tori and
have
John.
been- and then Kate and Peter have been meeting and starting with municipal, getting all of that collected, getting it into the database, cleaning the data, making sure that we're making the right assumptions, and then once we get the municipal done, we move into the community realm, which is much
Much
harder.
messy.
You're doing all the work. I'm just trying to absorb some knowledge.
All right, so are we ready?
I just have a question before we leave this topic.
Okay.
And it's really for these SS4NH or.
Yeah, we're gonna have to make some
SS4S.
changes to that name.
SS4S and the Eco Club. And one of the important things is that we get outreach to every sector of the age group of the community, and I hope you guys are interested in playing a role in the outreach. And
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We have
I don't know what that
connections in
looks like
high
yet,
and
but-
low places, Peter.
Yeah, I know, that's what we
Can't
like.
forget the low ones.
We like, yep, good. Well, I didn't
Yeah.
want to leave you out, because I think that's an
Oh, yeah.
important part of it. And I know you guys are engaged and interested, but,
Yeah, we're here.
yep,
We're
no, I
always-
appreciate it.
We're always willing.
Good, Wes, I know you had to leave at 7:30.
Yes, I want to thank everybody. I want to underscore the thanks and congratulations. That bill would not have passed without without you and groups like us, and without who mobilized and brought forward the general population where over something like 60% in New Hampshire now knows that climate change is going to have an impact and are worried. The other thing that I will say is I was glad I'm here tonight so that when I come back to have a place on the agenda, I can keep it to about 5 minutes and give people detail to read later.
Enjoy the play.
On that note, namaste.
Wes.
All right, so I think we just got through. Does anything else need to be said about the inner communications, transport, that? So basically, we have a complex system which is evolving, and we are using every aspect, and we'll address the legalistic or financial things as they come up in plan. And where else did we go?
We did community
The,
engagement,
Community, right?
and we did just above
community
it, the
engagement, should we say
Inflation
something
Reduction
about
Act.
the,
Okay, so we've
Platforms.
done that,
Oh, sure.
and so we have.
Bert, we didn't quite finish community engagement.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention to the group that we're still looking at those two platforms, Mass Energize and Bright Action, and Portsmouth High School Eco Club is on it, and Students for Sustainability, Seacoast Students for Sustainability is on it.
Trust me, this is all the proof I need.
I'm sorry.
Oh, gotcha.
And
Fine, we'll get
we're
it.
going to have demonstrations from both platforms at a Portsmouth Climate Solutions meeting. And I just wanted to announce it here in case anybody wants to join us. One will be September 28th.
Hopefully,
Yeah,
yeah.
probably. We haven't lined it up yet. But if you get in touch with Jess or me, we can make sure that you get the Zoom link. So they'll be answering our questions and demonstrating their sites.
Yeah, that'll be an hour on a Wednesday evening from 7 to 8.
I think
They
that's a
will-
Thursday, isn't it? 28th?
When's, oh,
28th was
okay, then it's the
I can't, I'm not gonna
It's
be
the
here.
27th.
I think
It's a Wednesday?
I think it's the 28th. Is it a Wednesday? Because we meet on Wednesdays, right?
Yeah,
And we said we'd go Wednesday, the 28th, or
Yes.
if they couldn't make it, we'd do the 14th.
okay.
And so anybody wants to hear them come and do their
Well, You're right,
presentation.
it's the Wednesday, the September 28th, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
September 28th.
That is Wednesday, yep.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, no, that was my fault.
Good.
Adding confusion.
Okay,
We'll find something.
Could I just throw in one interesting thing that I just heard on the radio this week about community engagement, and I think really solidified in my head why it's so important. And that was that there was I think it was a survey result that I just heard about on NPR in the last couple of days, that was saying how nationwide, it was on the order of like 2/3, 70% of people realize that climate change is a real thing. They are really happy that action is happening on it, like the Inflation Reduction Act. But they have a perception that most people don't think that way. They think that they're in a minority, and that only like 30% of people actually feel that, even though it's a large majority of people. And I think that that's something that makes people feel,
Anxious.
well, not only anxious, but like helpless. Like, oh, everybody's against this. I'm one of the few people that actually thinks that this is the right thing to do. And I think that that, in a nutshell, to me, really summed up why community engagement is so important, because then the more people know that the more people know, and the more people feel that, you feel lifted by that. You feel like you can do something about that. You feel like you're part of a movement that's in the majority, not a movement that's in the minority. So I think that really speaks to all the great work that you guys are doing and that needs to be done and the value that can really come of it.
In that regard, just a curiosity, as I talk to architects and I talk to people like yourself, and you say there's a lot of people that, you know, you have to communicate. How many of them already are there and are asking you? How much of a market, when you're going, you know, I know that, can you give us kind of a feeling, because I talked to 100 architects 20 years ago, put them on a line on sustainability, and a lot of them didn't know about it. But that was 20, 30 years ago. What are your two experiences in terms of people you deal with? When you say 2/3, where is it at from your perception?
Well, I have a skewed perception because I'm usually working with people that are already pretty engaged. That's kind of the sector of the market that I work in. But I would say right now, it's kind of at an inflection point where I think most of the design professionals are really coming along with there, and now they're trying to get their clients along with them. So it's the people that are spending the money to build the buildings that have to be convinced that, you know, there's a reason to build it differently or spend more money or invest upfront for future savings type of thing.
Yeah,
don't know if
I
you
mean,
agree with that.
I would almost fully agree with that. I mean, I think, again, skewed because of the type of projects that I do and, you know, specialize in green building, therefore I get green building projects. But it's often an education battle early on, if anything. We get a lot of, oh, we can do that for the same cost. You're like, yeah, we've been able to do that for the same cost for the last 5-10 years, you know. But now we're at the point where we have enough proof of concept in a lot of buildings and projects, and we have numbers, and we have, look, it works on many different levels, that it's easier to translate that. But it's often the client, and it's often, I think what we're seeing a lot is it's starting to trickle down into like smaller sectors in the industry. And I mean, it often starts, I do a lot of, you know, federal and bigger things, and things like this Inflation Act just bolster that further, and they set the example a lot of times for everyone else to kind of follow, and for those technologies to develop and be able to be used in different ways. So I would say that at this point, if you, this might be a bit of a hot take, if you are a designer in the construction world and you are not aware of sustainable building, you are in the minority, and you need to maybe come out of your office a little bit more. But there's a big difference between knowing it's out there and people do it, and pursuing it, or having the education within your firm, or the information for a client to come and say, I truly want this. But there's a big gap in there that is really just about education.
Thanks. Yeah.
A thought back on the, just the selection of the consultant. I don't know who the review team is, but having been on the receiving end of a lot of these proposals, not this one in particular, but with other projects with the city and stuff, and also as having been a consultant that has vied for projects, I think the question of, you know, what will you do for community engagement, you know, if it gets to the interview process, would be really good, because it's just wide open. You don't tell them your thoughts, they're gonna come at you with what they're proposing, what maybe a case study of things that they've done, which, you know, could open the door to, oh, this is someone that's really gonna, you know, get the job done for the city to achieve, you know, the outreach necessary. I mean, there's a lot of avenues to get the word out, but, you know, a lot of people just, you know, glance over it, and it doesn't really get them involved. So, you know, I think, you know, and you'll know when you get submittals, you know, hopefully you get a good, you know, mix of things, and then, you know, technically I'm guessing they'll all have the technical wherewithal to do the data side. It's gonna be the outreach side that's gonna be more difficult. And they may think, oh, we can just toss something that way, and I would really drill in
Yeah.
to that part.
Thanks. I think that's sagacious advice.
I'm gonna look that word up. I hope it's good.
It comes from sage.
Oh, okay, yeah, sounds good. I'll take that.
All right, so where are we now? Let's see. Did we, Portsmouth Green Building?
We were just talking about building, that's a good segue to actually
Yeah, perfect.
talking
segue.
about buildings.
Yeah, so, was it last meeting I did the presentation here? I guess so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
Last month.
and then since then, I've had the chance to meet with Effie a little bit and meet with Peter and kind of start looking at what those next steps are. And, you know, I think there are a lot of ways to go about it. I think starting at the municipal level seems like it makes the most sense, meaning some type of green building policy within the municipal government and for public municipal buildings. As though from a, you know, statistical impact, it is still going to be really small. It is a proof of concept, and it is showing the commitment of the city to doing those things. So beginning to work on what that framework looks like. What I was saying about the, you know, passionate versus plausible, like what is gonna have a big impact, but is also not going to be inhibiting to other. So like I think of, you know, affordable housing and these other entities that are going on in the city and that are important. And so making sure that whatever we're proposing for like a green building policy among the city plays well with all of the other things that are going on, improvement plans and all of these things. So started working on that framework a little bit, had some conversations with Peter, definitely going to rope Aubrey for all of his mechanical side of things, because it's a huge part of the conversation. And looking at hopefully bringing something to a lot of to the city council, which I think from Peter and I conversation kind of steps in that would be, you know, as a subcommittee coming up with what we think that looks like. What is, you know, what are the points of this municipal green building policy based off of, you know, technical background and what we see in other places, bringing it to this group for thoughts and a bit of approval to then be brought to city council for, I think the first one would be for like a, you know, more working session, and then in the future, hopefully for adoption of some type of municipal policy for green buildings. And though there are many other things that can be done down the road, I think that was really kind of like the first step. And then another conversation that Peter and I had a lot of is making sure that, you know, from a law standpoint within statutes in New Hampshire, where are the points where we can't do certain things because the statutes in New Hampshire don't allow us to do those things. And even if there are things that we might want to do in the future, knowing where those points are and which directions maybe are going to be a lot harder than others. So started doing some of that and looking into statutes, looking into other towns in New Hampshire who maybe implemented these things. There's many towns that have implemented these things, but not that many in New Hampshire. And, you know, state statutes is going to be a difficult part of that process, especially if we start looking at green building and within, you know, the community realm or outside of just municipal government.
Well, I want to say two things about that, because on the city side, the city has a history now of building green buildings. So I would think there'd be support at the council level of some sort of policy, and maybe there has to be some discussion to get there, but that shouldn't be a huge lift, and it makes sense.
The
And
precedent's
then
there.
the articles you sent and looking at the New Hampshire Municipal Association, I was more encouraged than I had been when we met, that there are opportunities. They talked a lot about specific items, which we kind of wanted to stay away from and do something more global. And so the question about the global still is out there, but it was encouraging. It looked like there was opportunities there to pass ordinances. I don't know what the support will be, you know, from the council and the planning board and other people that review a ordinance change and how it would fly with the building code and all that, but from what the articles showed, it didn't look like there was a huge barrier in law, but I haven't looked into it that much and explored it.
There's, kind of right in line with this, I just scanned the headline and kind of the top level of this article this morning, so I want to dig into it later tonight when I have a little more time. But I just read an article about how the DOE is allocating, seems like a small amount of money for the federal government, but it's like $250 million, directly towards promoting green building nationwide, with the main focus being on encouraging states and municipalities to adopt, quicker adoption to the latest codes.
Building codes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Where typically it's a slow cycle
Yeah.
to adopt the,
About
you
this
know,
last time,
states are,
didn't
you know, quite far behind the
Latency.
most recent ones, and they're really pushing to put money to push adoption quicker. So that's something I think that we should look into, that we might be able to leverage either locally or maybe, you know, coordinate with other more forward-thinking cities to kind of put some pressure on the state level to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you know if Durham's been successful in any of their attempts to go beyond the building code?
Not that I've seen in like a,
It was being discussed like
Yeah.
3+ years ago when I wanted to go beyond the
I'll
building code in
look
New
into
Hampshire.
it. So far, the only town that I've seen that has written ordinances was Epping, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And theirs started,
That's a surprise.
yeah, theirs started in their zoning ordinances,
I talked with
which is originally the direction I went with when I was talking to Peter, because that's the ordinance that I live in most of the time. And then theirs actually got pulled out of their zoning ordinance and went to their city ordinance. So there's a lot of conversation in where these things live. But I think kind of I think that the municipal side, like Peter's saying, like that, this is a controlled entity that the city has the ability to control. And so I think that is a really great jumping point for people. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of movement going on with green building. And I'm hopeful that timing works out with that, if we can start moving on a lot of these things.
Where was that article about the DOE fund?
I'll forward it to the group.
Oh, great.
Oh, that'd be great, thanks.
Good. And Effie, before I forget, will you make sure that under transportation, Bill was saying that they will be meeting between now and September. They'll give us an update so that we can get them on the September. And hopefully in October, November, they will be bringing recommendations so that it can be a resource for community engagement. So that's the kind of their goal by November, to try to get a document that will help us with the community engagement and the cap. Okay,
Can I say one thing?
what's that?
I'm a date setter, because it's the only way I can get anything done. I would love to make sure that this works well with the timing and the momentum we currently have. And, have conversations with Aubrey and hopefully bring in a couple other people as well. And hopefully have something drafted to bring to this committee for what we would think, from a technical guidance standpoint, some type of green building policy for municipality is at the September, this
Okay, so
September
we'll get
meeting.
that on the agenda too.
Yeah, so that we
That's
can
good.
look at that and flesh it out and talk about it, and then with the hope that, I guess that would be probably the following city council, like one after that.
October.
Right, the October one, maybe that could be the first, intro plug
And I may not be able to make the next meeting of this committee. I think that's the week where I, going on vacation, go backpacking. But although I couldn't make the meeting last Thursday, please let me know when the next meeting is, because I want to get something I tried pushing years ago, and I'd love to see it succeed. So,
Do you think that that approach of, you're saying basically 2 meetings of the city council, one to introduce the concept and then one to maybe pass something? Do you think that is too ambitious?
If
or-
it's, I think it is ambitious, like getting in front of the city council, that only takes me or Kate putting it on the agenda. But to pass something, even if it's just a policy, they usually like to have, like you introduce it one meeting and then it's sent to the city attorney and then it's voted on the next meeting. If it's an actual ordinance, it'll take at least 4 meetings.
I mean,
There's multiple
in some ways,
readings
it's like, I
and-
don't.
It wouldn't be an ordinance, it would be, the first one would be a policy.
First
Yeah,
one would be a
Ordinance-
city council policy.
Yeah, policy, that could be done in 2 meetings, sometimes 1 meeting, but
Yeah.
it's
I
usually,
see it as this is an opportunity to start,
yeah,
you know, so if we can just get that started,
yeah. I think
then
it'd
it's
be-
just, I hope it can get adopted sooner rather than later.
And I've written multiple city council policies, so I could.
Now, what do you think, Josh, about how the council would look at that in relation to the capital, climate action plan? Would they think that, okay, we can proceed with that, or would they want to kind of see the report back from the climate action plan before they're putting specific policies into place?
That's a good question, but there's a lot of things that could be done prior to the climate action plan being adopted a year or so from now. This is one of them.
Well, and I
And-
think in John's presentation about the cap, he really made that point, that,
Yeah.
you know, we're not gonna wait for the cap to do a lot of these things.
And policies technically sunset the end of every term, then they get re-upped, they get voted on again the first meeting of the next term of the council. So it's very possible, can be changed just as easily. Bring a policy back and amend it at a meeting and go from there, so.
I just had a couple of things to say, because I was involved in the group before Tori took it on, which is great. Josh, you had mentioned you couldn't come to the meeting, and Beth Moreau couldn't come and wanted recordings of the meeting, but the way we set the meeting up was not proper, so we didn't have recording to give you. We will have some notes to get to you all shortly. The other thing I wanted to say was Allison, what's her last name?
Tanner?
Tanner from Conservation Commission was involved, and she's very interested, and I'm working with her on talking to the Trees and Greenery Committee about some of the ordinances around removal of trees for parking spaces and clear cutting for buildings. So we're looking at what other cities are doing with that. So that's still alive.
Could you, Effie, send me, if you have a contact with that committee?
Sure.
Because we have Eco Club, we had that 400 tree
Okay.
project, and that kind of stalled. I don't know if,
It's still
Well, Trees and Greenery is doing that.
Yeah,
Is
they're
that
doing it.
separate than Eco Club's
well,
400
it
trees?
stalled in the sense that we lost our place with it,
Sure.
and now McGlinchey,
Yeah,
Dr. McGlinchey has left.
Yeah.
So,
Sure,
we're
we
in a
can talk.
transitional period, so I would just like to reach out and
Assistant
see,
principal
you
in
know,
Marshwood.
see where we stand.
Sure.
But yeah, if you
Sure,
could forward
great.
that, that'd be great. Thank you.
So who's the new liaison for the Eco Club? Is there one?
Hannah Dool, who's a reading specialist, and I guess she has a permaculture garden, and
wow.
she's
Yeah. McGlinchey recommended her.
she was highly
Great.
recommended. So
Great.
How do you spell her last name?
Hannah Dool,
Yeah.
D-U-L.
Oh, wow, that's easy.
Yeah, for a reading specialist too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanna ask Kim for her contact.
Oh, I can give you. For Hannah's.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, I have her email if you'd like that.
sure.
It would just be her first.
H.
Yeah, H. Dool.
And she, what is her position? No.
She's a reading specialist at the high school, but she'll. I mean, I told McGlinchey, I said all we really need is a babysitter.
Good to have an engaged babysitter.
I think Hannah is the real deal.
Which we're lucky. You know, we
She
could-
does permaculture, or she?
Yeah, yeah. She's it'd be hdool at sau52.org. So more to come, but we had a meeting the other day, and we're ramping up for this
Good.
year,
That's great.
Love it.
against all odds.
Quick
Do
logistics.
you have another date for the green building?
We do not, because I was hoping to figure out when works for most people. Which is a never-ending game. But I'm hoping bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, maybe flip-flopping with
Yeah, I'm
the
actually
greenhouse gas
texting her now.
meetings that I don't have to remember 2 different meeting times. But we'll see if that works out.
Texting her.
Do we
Um,
need
It's really
to
cool.
say
I have an-
anything more
I have a
about,
rubber band.
I have a
I'm a
logistics question.
I'm an Apple ecosystem.
Two things. One,
devotee.
and this is for Josh as well, is there any reason why bringing a policy forward to city council would slow or inhibit an ordinance later? Is there any reason why we wouldn't wanna pursue going for a city council policy
That's an
and
interesting
instead
question.
going straight for an ordinance?
This is interesting stuff.
The playing devil's advocate, some people might say, well, you just passed the policy. Why are we gonna spend weeks or months on an ordinance? Because most likely, if the ordinance is gonna impact any portion of the zoning ordinances, the city council could look at it, and then we would refer to the planning
Would have to start at the
board.
board, right?
Like the electric vehicle ordinance, which I took a crack at, and then city council voted to send it to the planning board, and it's still waiting to go through that process. So that's a very lengthy process, and the planning board's been having some difficulty with some of the basic changes to ordinances. So I think it would make sense to do a policy first, and then put all your effort into the ordinance, and that will just take time.
Here's a related question then, because what you're talking about is a policy or ordinance for municipal buildings to be
Start.
built to a green standard, right? Building municipal buildings is a very long arc. Would a policy that can change every 2 years potentially be sufficient for that? Or would that need to be an ordinance that carries through no matter who gets elected?
Most policies don't change. So like, when the city council first gets sworn in, they'll be given a packet which lists every policy, and then they'll just vote on them in bulk. And like, only every now and again is there a policy which sunsets. But recently, when it came to the sidewalks and the two-way portion of State Street, that was an old policy when it came to who pays for brick sidewalks, which needs to go back and be revisited. But the point being, yeah, once the policy gets passed, it will be in place unless if it's changed. So I'm not concerned about it being taken away once it's passed.
Okay.
It doesn't go away unless they vote it away.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my second part is because the legality with buildings is a really fun part of the whole conversation. What is the only avenue for legal counsel through the city council process? Or as a committee, can we
Yes, you.
have a chance to sit down with legal counsel before we
Yes,
get
you can.
into the fun part of city council? Yeah.
The city attorney's office doesn't work for the city council, they work for the city manager. Like, sure, Bob Sullivan's well-known for city council meetings, but Jane Farini goes to all of the school board meetings. I get that? Is it Jane Farini who does school board meetings, or is it Dwyer? Either way, yeah, it could definitely be presented to the city attorney's office, and they could pick someone to go over it prior to, and I could work with
Great
you
to
guys on that.
Yeah, because it's always great to preemptively
Yeah.
deal with is that legal question? Cool, awesome.
Okay, anything else on Portsmouth Green Building Work Group?
Bert, your laser vision for the agenda tonight has paid off.
Thank you. No, but I left some things on here that I felt a little badly. I didn't want to get into these earlier because these are more value and, I think, dialogue questions. And so the last two, this one I think is a interesting value discussion and leverage. This one, I think, has to do with how do we deal with difference of opinions. And I don't know if anybody wants to go to either one of these first.
I would say the solar farms, because, was it Wes who added the solar farms initially?
No, I did.
Was it regarding Tom Morgan's? And that factors into the zoning as well.
Is that the
All right, let's
op-ed?
go with solar
Yeah,
farms.
can somebody
Is
give
that
a
the op-ed?
Yeah.
I gotta look
All right,
that up. I didn't read the.
you want to go with that, Effie?
Well, Tom Morgan, who works as a planner professionally, but not for the city of Portsmouth, and seems to have some long-standing feelings about the city's planning department, wrote a guest column in the Portsmouth Herald on Tuesday. And he says we don't have solar farms because our city's zoning ordinance is noticeably hostile to renewable energy and to solar in particular. And then he talks about the renewable energy policy that was passed, and there was a vote back, and it goes through a lot of history that I don't think we should get into a he said, she said, but I'm very interested as a member of this committee to see that we do everything we can to make solar possible. So that's where I'd like to pick up.
And I
But
could
people are
speak to
asking me, is this true? Is this, how does it work? And I respect Tom, so I'm not saying he's lying, but I'm just saying different perspectives on things.
So this is how it works, and I guess some facts. I've known Tom for years. I met with Tom, I guess, during the last election, and two things he talked about were both an electric vehicle charging station ordinance, like an overlay for Portsmouth, and one for solar. And I spoke with him before I drafted the electric vehicle charging ordinance, and it works the same way where the one nice thing about New Hampshire's statutes is when it comes to zoning, they allow cities to do almost anything, which including being proactive when it comes to renewable energy. So that's unlike almost everything else.
Wait a
So-
minute, the state allows
Yeah, the state allows you
cities
to.
to be, okay.
to be very proactive. There are like caveats with that, but it's actually worded in like that's a goal for zoning, should be that. But there's nothing written currently in Portsmouth ordinances that I'm aware of that like puts a big overlay, you're allowed to have this size solar array here, kind of thing. So that's what Tom's talking about, kind of similar to the electric vehicle amendments, which I put forward, which is, hey, we should specifically state what type of electric vehicle charger is allowed. Likewise, do the same thing for solar, that way it's easier to get things approved. So that's,
But that change to the zoning ordinances didn't happen, is that right?
not yet. So the electric vehicle charger amendments that Councilor Cook and I put forward, that's still at the planning board waiting to be voted on. I'm
Right.
hoping to be taken up in
But the-
September, October.
But the bigger question
The
about
solar
solar
one-
farms.
I didn't draft that because I only had so much time, and that's far more difficult and involves some statutes. So I just put forward the electric vehicle one with the goal of doing the solar one at some point.
So is the planning department involved in writing something about the solar farms or solar
I mean,
arrays?
the solar, it's interesting that he says we're hostile to solar farms. We're kind of silent on
Yeah,
solar
we're
farms.
silent.
Well, actually,
And
are we?
it's,
Sorry, that was a very open-ended question. Well, because we actually expanded the zoning to allow for more solar on buildings 5-6 years ago. So like height restrictions, and there's actually things that made it easier.
Correct.
and you can have solar as an accessory use without even, there's no
It's not
approval needed. It's
taxable.
just part of it. So like solar, rooftop solar for a residence isn't part of this discussion really, because that's pretty much allowed everywhere. The city puts solar on municipal property. Solar farms would be,
Like a
you know,
business.
like a big overlay kind of thing that you would specifically allow it as the principal use. as, is the solar farms. When you look at the zoning ordinance and someone comes in and says, I want to build a Walmart, well, you look in there and you'll find the zoning where retail is allowed, big retail is allowed. And then you find out where you can build your Walmart. Same with solar. If you want to build a 50-acre solar farm, then you need to find it in the zoning ordinance where it's permitted and what zone it's permitted in. And I guess the question I have is, who wants to build a solar farm? And that's what I kind of, maybe it's, I'm not being flip, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying it's not, a developer is going to come in and look for the highest and best use. That's how zoning kind of works and how developers work. And so a solar farm probably isn't the highest and best use. But, that said, there's no reason not to put it in the zoning ordinance. It's just, kind of get in line. There's a lot of things that we want to put in the zoning ordinance.
The
and-
solar farm should go on top of the PHS parking lot, is where
Well,
it
we
should
could
go.
put it there, we could put it there now. I mean, we
Yeah.
don't need it to be in the ordinance for that.
Yeah.
If it's an accessory use, it can go in there. It's
Yeah.
really if you want to put it in a big open space area. And then you get into questions of, would the neighbors like it? How would that fly if you put it in the zoning ordinance? Or is it a wetland or a conservation land? Do we want it in those areas? And so when you start digging into it as an ordinance change, it gets more complicated. But there's no reason to
But
say
it
we
sounded like
don't
it-
want it.
There
and
was a
it's-
policy, and it led up to the stage of having something from this committee.
Well, it went
to
to the
go
city
to the
council.
city
This letter
council.
he wrote originally went to the city council.
Yeah.
And the city council referred it to the the sustainability committee, and the sustainability committee doesn't do anything with it, because they didn't really know what to do with it, I think. But I guess the simple thing would be to say, recommend to the land use advisory committee, is that what they call themselves?
Yes.
Yeah, Counselor Moreau and Beverly Mesa-Zent, the planning director, kind of take zoning recommendations and then work them through and then bring them to the planning board. So that could be a recommendation to the city council, who would then send it there, if this committee wanted to do that. I mean, there's no reason not to, it's just, it seems like there's a lot of important things that might happen, and I can't imagine someone building a solar farm, I don't know.
So
And
what
that's
would,
not, well, I don't want to get,
what would that look like? The committee making a motion to have the land use committee under Beth Moreau and Beverly Zent review the zoning ordinances to allow principal use of solar farms?
yep, pretty much.
So-
That's
so
what
moved.
that's what his op-ed is saying, I think, because he says we're hostile to solar, so.
Yeah. So is,
I think the big picture, what I see, we're doing community power, and we put a lot of energy into that. One of the outcomes of community power is that communities can set up and do their own production and have their own utility, make it local. So that's one option. And what I'm looking at is, I don't know if we're there yet, but what maybe the outcome of this is, to get anything to happen, you want to reduce as many barriers as possible.
right.
So the question is, are there any barriers now?
For the city to set up a solar array?
Yeah.
Not really.
But for,
City
I
is
think,
City to do it.
I think that was the key
Private
word.
entity, there'd be a
That-
barrier,
Yeah.
because they'd have to go get a variance right now.
Okay, that's where I think,
That's-
is that a little bit where the
Variance
rub comes in?
From what?
From the
From the zoning
zoning
ordinance.
board. Like, so the.
No, I know from the board, but like, what?
To allow solar farm as a principal use where it's not currently allowed.
And that's what the EV
Where-
ordinance did. It allows principal use for like level 3 chargers.
Yeah.
So they don't need variances. They can just move forward. So the zoning, so the solar would be similar if an ordinance allowed it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this committee could make a motion to present to Beth Moreau's committee about allowing solar farms as a principal use in the zoning ordinances.
So that's one of two ways to do it, is going through Beth's committee, and Beth doesn't like it, but the other way is just having the city council refer it to the planning board,
Okay.
which either way gets complicated, because I know Beth's committee is focusing primarily on affordable housing at the moment and accessory dwelling units and all of that, so that's gonna take a lot of time to go through. But then if me or Counselor Cook got the city council to vote to refer something to the planning board, it's kind of forcing something on them, which they might not have the capacity to take on at the moment. So it's a chicken, not
Yeah.
chicken or egg, but it's.
Well, and the other thing I
It's a
just
rock
wanted.
and another
Yeah.
rock.
I just wanted to ask, because Beverly had mentioned the incentives, Phase 3 of her committee's work. Does this any way relate to incentives, the solar farms? No.
I don't think so. I think
No.
solar farm as a principal use is its own.
Okay, its own topic. So I think this committee is the proper place to make a motion like that at this point. But I don't know the best way, whether it goes through the city council to planning department or through Beth Moreau's committee.
Is that a decision we have to make?
No, it's
That'd be
not.
a decision for the city council to make.
No, and this is an advisory committee to the city council, so probably it is more appropriate to say, maybe they say, consider taking it up as a land use change and leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that
Not-
makes.
Not suggesting where it goes.
So does anyone
Council
have the
decide.
wording for that motion?
Well, let me, Jess wanted to say something.
Well, I mean, not that I don't want solar farms by any means, but if we have to focus our influence, should that be, like, I am more motivated to make sure future construction is green and that every new building that's built has solar panels on it than maybe to push for making a solar farm a priority.
That's a very good
Again,
point.
not that I don't necessarily think it's something we need to talk about and consider, but is that where we focus our energy at this point, is just my thought. Or getting, the entire high school parking lot covered in solar panels. That's, we have so many things to do.
Eco Club has $10,000 in the budget we can contribute to that project.
So that must cover most of it.
That might cover a few spots.
If we
Maybe my
only
spot.
have so much capital at any given moment, where might we have the most?
Where we have.
Well, it's a pretty light lift for us. We just recommend somebody else deal with it.
And I don't see it as an either-or. I see it as addressing something that's out there, and people are asking me about it just because I'm on this committee, so I feel like I'm just following up. I'm not coming in here thinking, this is what I have to do, but it sounds like it makes sense. And
Well-
I don't know the answer in terms of, how big a space someone would need for a principal-use solar farm, but, it might be out there, and we shouldn't be preventing anything that could happen commercially in the way of solar.
Well, but here's where I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah,
And it's gonna connect also to climate emergency
huh,
in some ways. When we look at leverage, we want to use our energy so we get the biggest bang for the buck. And that means how we prioritize and what we choose. And so what I was hearing about, Jeff, we have these on the thing. Now, if we do make recommendations, we very rarely make recommendations. And so if we go to the city council, I think it's going to be recognized because we don't go there very often. So where do we want to put the big bang for our buck? John Tabor is working with Cliff Lazenby, and they've worked for 2 years now on the community
power.
power. I see that solar farms are almost integral to one of the potentials that they would go. So in some ways, I'm thinking strategically, rather than use our airspace capital, that maybe we talk to John or to Cliff and say, what are they thinking about? And they're already in the mix in a committee, and maybe they would have the energy, because that's their bailiwick. So I'm more inclined to maybe communicate with them and see what they'd have to say, then go, and then maybe come back, just another exploration.
I totally agree with both Bert and Jessica here, where in my mind, although solar people love it, it's sexy, it's fun to talk about. It's not that big a deal. Like energy efficiency and umbilicals, like that's where you're gonna get the most benefit. Is like the 90% reductions in energy spent and 10% renewable energy. So I think that should be a priority for this committee, is pushing those ordinances and almost, I guess, tossing the football over to the community solar, did I get that right?
Community power.
Community Power Committee.
Concept Energy Advisory Committee.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And so like, no, just refer to them to get their thoughts, and they could be the ones to possibly make the recommendation, because at some point, it's gonna go from you automatically get your renewable, you get your electricity from renewable energy source, if that goes through, unless you opt out. Two, we need more renewable energy sources. So I think that's a more natural outreach for them than it would be for us. And we wouldn't be spending time at the council on something which some councilors don't think the planning board has time to take on, when there's other things which I think would be more beneficial with the planning board, starting with the policy, then going with those changes.
Yeah, I think you said, what do we want to be focusing on? Well, we don't have to necessarily choose, like Effie said, we don't have to choose one or the other. I mean, that's part of why we have the climate action plan, is to see where we're gonna be in the future. I don't think it hurts to talk about solar panels on the high school parking lot, or you know, damming the you know, stuff in the future, damming up Pierce Island so the pool doesn't get seawater in it, stuff like that. But you know, it doesn't hurt to think in the future.
Yeah.
But I mean, we can make recommendations, but I think if we start, you know, we just take it as logically as possible. I don't think, like, I think it's good to not to have to eliminate options. Maybe I'm talking in circles, but it wouldn't hurt for us to know that, you know, maybe a solar farm is in our future, even if we're not actively dealing with it in the next, you know, city
Well, and we
council
could
term.
show our support through that other group,
Yeah,
right? If
exactly.
that other group decided to come forward to the city council and say, yes, this is something you should shift, we could say, yes, we support that action as well.
Mhm.
So it might, yeah, kind of.
So it
That's-
sounds like it has the, you know, the concept, it aligns with our
Yeah.
beliefs as a subcommittee, and it's something that we are recommending that people who, quite frankly, know more and are more informed and in the loop with that specific entity can
And
take on further
it
with
could
our support.
either be us passing a motion to officially reach out to the other committee, as we're referencing this them, or I could give John Tabor a call. Someone who's good friends with Cliff could just talk to Cliff about it to get their thoughts on it.
I could text Cliff right now.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on,
I don't know that Cliff's still involved.
yeah, I'm not sure he's still involved either.
I don't know if he is, actually.
But, so.
But John Tabor definitely.
Yeah.
John Tabor, for sure.
Yeah.
Does that feel okay?
Well, is it okay with the group? I mean, it's not really up to me. I
Well,
just
I
felt
mean,
like it
I
was
think
important
There's
for.
two things. You were saying perhaps a motion, or we go, where do you come down now?
Well, I think all of us have to be spokespersons about solar energy. So I think it's really a group decision, and I'm fine with how the group goes, yes. And I would like to hear what John thinks about it. So maybe next month we could hear about that, or, I don't know, through you.
Yeah, Josh
or-
talked to him,
Yeah,
that be
I'll
do it.
report back. You can
That's
put that in
great.
notes that Josh will
Yeah.
get back to us on that.
That sounds great.
All right, moving right along here, we got 14 minutes, and I said this would relate to climate emergency. That was one, I have some thoughts on that, but you want to go ahead and just
Yeah,
share
I
what
just
you-
wanted this group to talk about this. I'm not saying tonight, I'm not gonna look for a motion or anything like that. But, you know, in Portsmouth, we're already experiencing severe weather, flooding, heat waves, a distressed environment. We already see that. And local governments are really in an ideal position to declare a climate emergency because they're looking out at their community's health and well-being and the environment. So a lot of communities have declared climate emergencies, and it really raises the importance, not just to this group, because we know about the urgency, but not everybody does, and it mobilizes attention and resources. So my idea would be, where we have the climate action plan coming, it would be like a 1-2 punch. So someone like a city council or a mayor would say, we're declaring a climate emergency in Portsmouth, and we have the tools to be addressing it. We're putting out a climate action plan that's going to give us specific actions to look at both the resilience of our community and reducing the emissions. So, you know, there's something like, I don't know, over 2,000 governments have already declared climate emergencies, and 19 national governments. So I think it's something we should think about and have on our radar. Maybe we want to do it when the climate action plan is done. I'm not saying, you know, come September when we're contracting with our climate action bidders, that it has to happen then, but I do think it's worth us thinking about, to let people know how serious this is.
Well, I
You
think
know,
that'd be,
it's-
yeah, I think that'd be good if, like, we might have talked about this at the last meeting, about saying, well, emergency, and very conveniently, here's the plan. Was it, I was talking to somebody about this.
I think you and I spoke
I
about
think
it.
we might have spoken
Yeah.
about it. Yeah. I really like that.
Mhm.
Sounds cute. It's like, oh, here you go.
I'm gonna go back to what I started with on that newspaper article and be able to leverage part of what I want to get in it. They didn't mention the cap, and I kept referring to it as a climate emergency in the sense where clearly it's a climate emergency, and the more people use that terminology, the more it gets used. The one thing that other government entities have is when you declare a climate emergency, like if the president declared one, he would be able to do certain things with executive authority and open up several funds similar to the Defense Production Act. Some governors could do the same thing. As a city in New Hampshire, declaring a climate emergency doesn't open up any gates automatically. It would just be us talking about it. So I'm definitely open to the idea, but I think just us referring to climate change as a climate emergency, getting it in everyone's, I don't know, in their lexicon, instead of saying global warming, they say climate emergency, is what actually gets it going.
Yeah, I would agree in that I think it's a really good messaging tool, like it's part of the message, but you might get negative pushback on declaring a climate emergency just from, and I guess personally, I feel like, yeah, we know that, I mean, if you look, you can see all the signs. There is a climate emergency, but we're actually really lucky in Portsmouth compared to some communities around the country and especially around the world. So part of me feels like I don't want to declare a climate emergency when there's people so much worse off than we are, both monetarily, but also really in terms of what's happening in our community. It's bad in terms of long-range sea level rise impacts, heat impacts, but there's places that are getting hit so much harder that I feel like,
Save
I
it
don't know.
for,
Not save it, or maybe, I don't know, I just don't feel like it, I feel like it's a
Give it 10
push
years.
that
yeah.
That might be a little
Yeah.
too far.
Wait till there's fish in the Pierce Island pool, then
yeah,
we'll.
exactly. Wait till the pool, yeah, when the pool goes under, then we can declare.
Then it's an
And it'll be
emergency.
salt water.
Then it'll be salt water.
Yeah.
Back to what it was.
That was
Yeah, right.
Should we just make it a saltwater pool?
Should we just open up?
Oh, good lord.
Well, I would like us to continue this next time. The thing that, when I first heard about it, I had two pulls. One of my pulls is, we can't be doing business as usual. We need to accelerate and scale. The other pull is, emergency gives me a visceral reaction that I got to do something. And in some ways, that's counter to what this committee's mandate is, which is all, for at least the way I perceive it, for the last 10, 12 years, we've been a committee that has done the best to do the overview for the long term and not get down too much on, we've gone up and down. So I would like to continue discussion, because I would say when somebody first used crisis, but who's our audience, and what is it gonna do to that audience? And I don't know that. But I think the fact that we're talking about it, we're talking about public engagement, and I think that it's worth continuing on. And if we can bring it up, if you want a little more time, that's why I put it towards the end, but this could be a longer discussion. So unless anybody has anything more to contribute tonight, yes, Jess, and we'll wind up with that, and then we'll do a closing.
I just have a quick devil's advocate kind of position from what you said, because I appreciate your point of kind of the word emergency instills fear. But based on what Aubrey told us, and that there are a lot more people out there who are worried about this, I wonder how many people are wondering, why hasn't Portsmouth declared a climate emergency yet?
Maybe we could each do our own focus group. Check it out and bring it back next week. I like that. Because I've talked about it with several people. I think it's an interesting conversation.
I think a good compromise between what I'm hearing Bert say, which is that, am I right in saying, Effie, that you are more ready, you think it would be better now, and you're leaning towards the sort of, we're not fear-mongering, we're planning?
I more really wanted to hear from the group.
Okay.
And I'm not saying, I really don't have a position. I want the position that is going to give us the greatest possibility to get to a climate-safe plan.
Okay. So my compromise, my suggestion would be for us to add to next month's agenda, we kind of stopped talking about sustainability visibility a little bit, and we had those kind of fun ideas. Maybe we revisit that and re-up that item and get brainstorming, and Eco Club and SS4S can contribute, and the middle schoolers who we heard from who were so creative, and we were talking about them today, how we wanna get them into our groups. Maybe that's a good place to start.
And just, I can wind up with the idea that came up for me when I was talking to Effie about this. If we have a huge tidal surge, bigger than we've ever had, and people see it in Portsmouth, it wouldn't hurt for us to have a resolution at the next city council meeting stating Portsmouth is declaring itself a climate emergency, on the basis that now we actually see it. And just like the green infrastructure bill, and that is, I heard about this 30 years ago with Lester Brown, and it's taken 30 years to get it, so we're in place now. So I think next week, if we even say, what would we say if we had a real emergency, and what would a helpful resolution for the council, so we had it in our back pocket as a
Yeah.
possibility.
I don't think we should wait for a tsunami or anything.
I think by that point, we won't have to say anything, people will get it.
Or fish in the pool, I don't
Yeah.
want to wait for that. But I do think releasing a city plan can be no offense to any city employees, but can be a big yawn, you know? Imagine the headline,
City
climate
plan.
action plan contracted, or whatever. To us, to me,
We spent
it's-
money.
I think
it's
that's a
so
big deal.
exciting. But if it happened conjunctly with an announcement of a climate emergency, we have a climate emergency worldwide. You know, you see it on the news, you hear about it. I met a climate refugee from Colorado moving to the seacoast
mentioned
last
that.
week.
Wow.
Yeah, because she lives too close to where the fire was, and she couldn't do it. She lived there 25 years, and she's moved to the seacoast. But I think if
Be
we said...
tsunami here before she knows it.
Yeah, right.
Bad luck.
I think if we said, There's a climate emergency here. We all have seen it globally, but Portsmouth is taking the lead and doing something about it. We have a climate action plan, and you all are going to be a part of it. That's
Whether you like it or not.
Will you get that in the notes and we'll bring it up? Okay.
Too late to rename it the Climate Emergency Plan?
All right.
One stone.
In the last 4
Our
minutes that are
solution to
left,
Could be the subcategory.
we're going to go around the room and any last thoughts or what are you taking away? And Aubrey, since you were the last one in, you get to start and you can go right or left.
Okay, I am taking away, I'm excited to work with these folks on the green building
All right.
subcommittee.
We go to your right, okay, go.
Good, very good discussions.
I will echo that, but also I'm glad we sort of touched on more of the subgroups and the working committees, because I think it was really important to see how that connected and like how we're gonna separate them, but also keep them together and keep them talking. So I'm glad we talked about that, because I was unclear.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have all this energy because it's not just a city plan, it's a community plan, I keep saying. So we need that, and it's great to have all that energy, so I hope we keep it up. And we don't have to put everybody in silos.
I'm taking away the incredible amount of work that's going on outside the committee, which is, continues to grow and is very encouraging.
I got some eye rolling at the city council meeting when I brought up the Conservation Commission's concerns about the pool. And then I got some text messages later on how Old Portsmouth, they don't appreciate that kind of thing. So it's always reassuring coming here and learning like, yes, people do care. Hearing on NHPR that like 70% of Americans are concerned and care about climate change.
On behalf
stuff
of
like
young Portsmouth, we
Young
appreciate, that you are paying attention.
Thank you.
What a 2022-23 school year it's gonna be. We have a lot of work to do, but it's exciting. And we're Phoenix Eco Club rising from the ashes. And we will continue contributing and collaborating and hopefully we won't be swimming with the fishes anytime soon. But yeah, it's always good to come back and reassess, and this kind of grounds me, seeing that, we are not alone.
Yeah. Kind of echoing off of that, but I'd also just want to say, I haven't been to one of these meetings in a while, and it's nice to see all the progress you guys made. For a while, I was like, oh, this is going kind of slow. I've been to a bunch of them, but after taking a little bit of a break, I came back, and a lot has happened, so it's really great to see that.
This might have been the boring part of the conversation, but policy is my jam. So hearing about the policy and the ordinances and what the next step is for the city council was, so it's so nice to have people who are interested in that same sort of thing and want to do something about it. So that's what this group feels like. It's people who not just talk about things, but get stuff done. So really lucky to be a part of it.
We do both.
Yeah, it's a great group, and I really appreciate the discussion and having you all here. Happy to be here, energized.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's just too much to take away. But yeah, I guess broadly, I am grateful for all of you and for all the knowledge and expertise and effort and time that you're committing to this. And a takeaway for me, again, that was a takeaway last night, is just wording, the words that you use and what they portray and what you want them to portray, and how important, especially for community engagement, that's going to be moving forward.
I took away that, how you go about things is often just as important as what you go about doing. And strategy never hurts, but it's a lot easier to have strategy when you are impassioned about something and it's something that 70% of people care about. That statistic actually really stuck with me, because I am in the group that I was like, wow, I actually wouldn't have thought that it was 70%. And I do it for work all the time, and I didn't feel that way. So I that stuck with me, even then it is encouraging.
Thanks, everybody, for a powerful meeting. We went 1 minute over, but we're still pretty good.
That's
Yeah, and
pretty solid.
our next meeting is September 22. So,
And who is, I think, who is?
Just skip a beat.
Kate would have been doing this, so she will take the notes, I would believe.